In the autumn of 1813, when England's fields burned gold beneath a lowering sky, and every household of consequence measured its worth in lineage and land, the Harcourt family awaited a visitor whose arrival might decide their future. The house itself bore witness to decline. Polished yet worn, gracious yet strained, its faded tapestries and carefully banked fires disguising debts that crept like ivy through every chamber. Mr. Augustus Harcourt, once a man of comfortable fortune and unchallenged authority, stood at the window with a stiffness that betrayed long practice at concealing fear, for he knew that gentility, when unaccompanied by wealth, was but a fragile shield in a merciless society. The Duke of Ashbury was expected before dusk. His title reached back to the wars of the Tudors, his estates spread across counties, and his presence alone promised salvation to families clever or desperate enough to secure his favor. Yet even a duke could not outrun time. His duchess had died young, his only son with her, and the continuation of his ancient name had become a matter of urgent necessity rather than distant concern. He came now to the Harcourts not merely as a guest, but as a judge, weighing suitability, obedience, and advantage with a precision learned through years of command. Mrs. Harcourt, pale with the exertion of anxious hospitality, arranged her daughters in the drawing-room with the care of a general deploying troops. Amelia, the elder, occupied the place of honor near the hearth, her beauty softened by candlelight and her expression rehearsed into modest animation. She possessed all the accomplishments prized by society: music, French, an agreeable manner, and she had been raised with the unspoken certainty that she would one day make a brilliant match. The rustle of her silk gown and the sparkle of her hair conveyed confidence born of constant admiration. Her sister Eleanor stood apart, partially obscured by a screen of carved walnut, as though she were an afterthought in her own home. At 23, she was neither youthful enough to inspire indulgence, nor striking enough to command notice. Her gown was plain, her posture attentive rather than decorative, and her expression bore the quiet composure of one accustomed to listening more than speaking. Eleanor read deeply, observed keenly, and had long understood that the world did not reward such habits in women unless accompanied by beauty or fortune. She did not resent her sister's advantages. She merely accepted her own obscurity with a resignation learned early and perfected through repetition. When the Duke arrived, the room altered its very breath. He entered without flourish, tall, grave, and deliberate, his countenance marked not by severity, but by a disciplined restraint that suggested both authority and fatigue. His gaze moved with intention, noting the arrangement of the room, the manner of its occupants, the subtle signs of strain beneath polished civility. He spoke courteously, his voice measured, his manners exact, and in doing so reminded them all that rank, when worn without arrogance, could be more formidable than ostentation. Conversation unfolded along predictable lines: weather, roads, the season's expectations. Yet beneath each exchange ran a current of calculation. Mr. Harcourt watched the Duke's eyes settle upon Amelia and felt a cautious relief, as though fate itself had chosen the sensible path. He spoke of his elder daughter's accomplishments with practiced pride, framing her virtues as assets while cloaking necessity in paternal concern. To any observer, the implication was clear and deliberate. Here stood the natural choice, the offering most worthy of such a distinguished suitor. The Duke listened without interruption, yet his attention drifted at moments Eleanor could not fail to notice. It was not admiration that drew his gaze toward her, but curiosity, sharpened by contrast. While Amelia spoke with graceful enthusiasm, Eleanor responded only when addressed, her words precise, her manner devoid of artifice. She watched the Duke not as a prize to be secured, but as a man whose presence altered the fate of all within reach. In her stillness lay a composure untrained by expectation, and in her silence a depth the Duke had learned, through long experience, not to dismiss. As the evening advanced, the subtle theater of presentation reached its quiet climax. Tea was poured, seats adjusted, and the moment arrived when Mr. Harcourt, emboldened by politeness and necessity, guided the conversation toward its purpose. With a voice carefully moderated, he spoke of the advantages of alliance, of mutual respect, and of his desire to see his daughters well settled. Then, with a glance toward Amelia that required no elaboration, he made his offer plain. "Take the pretty one," his tone suggested, "and all shall be made agreeable." The Duke did not answer at once. He rose and crossed the room, examining a miniature portrait, then the spines of books upon a shelf Eleanor knew well. He asked questions, not of dowries or display, but of habits, preferences, and temper. When Eleanor answered, he listened with an attention that startled her, as though her thoughts possessed an unexpected weight. In that instant, she felt both exposed and acknowledged, sensations she had rarely encountered together. At last, he turned back to the family, his expression unchanged yet resolute. His choice, when spoken, fell upon the room like a dropped glass, sudden and irrevocable. He requested Eleanor's hand. Silence followed, heavy with disbelief, pride wounded, and futures reconfigured. Amelia's color rose and fell. Mrs. Harcourt's lips parted without sound. Mr. Harcourt stared, his careful calculations undone by a decision he had not imagined possible. Eleanor herself did not speak. She felt the room tilt, her familiar invisibility stripped away and replaced by a scrutiny she had never sought. In the Duke's steady gaze lay neither pity nor triumph, only intent. Whatever lay ahead would demand courage she had not yet tested, and the knowledge settled within her with equal measures of fear and awakening hope. As the candles burned lower and society's judgment gathered like a distant storm, Eleanor understood that her life had been irrevocably altered, not by beauty or ambition, but by being truly seen at last. No formal acceptance was demanded that night, for propriety required reflection, yet every heart present understood that reflection would change nothing. The Duke's carriage departed beneath the darkening sky, leaving behind a household suspended between gratitude and resentment. Servants whispered in corners, already reshaping the story to suit their loyalties, while Eleanor retreated to the small sitting room where she often read alone. There, amid familiar shadows, she pressed her hand to her breast and attempted to steady her thoughts. She knew too well the cost of stepping beyond society's prescribed boundaries, especially for a woman without the armor of beauty. Still, beneath her apprehension stirred a fragile resolve. If she were to be judged, let it be for her character rather than her silence. The night closed around the Harcourt house, carrying with it both promise and peril, and Eleanor sensed that the path before her, though uncertain, would demand a strength she was only just beginning to claim. Beyond those walls, the world waited, sharp-eyed and unforgiving, ready to test whether quiet worth could survive relentless scrutiny and endurance alone. Weeks passed after the Duke's declaration, and Eleanor's world narrowed to measured hours and guarded hope, for engagement in Regency England was not a promise of happiness but a trial of endurance. Letters were exchanged with formality rather than warmth. Each sentence weighed against propriety, each phrase a negotiation between candor and restraint. Eleanor learned quickly that to be chosen was not the same as being welcomed, and that society, having ignored her for years, now examined her with unsparing interest. The Duke visited when duty permitted, his manner unfailingly courteous yet carefully reserved. He spoke to Eleanor of estate matters, charitable obligations, and the expectations of rank, as though instructing her in a language she must master to survive. She listened attentively, sensing that beneath his composure lay an anxiety equal to her own. He had chosen against convenience, and such choices demanded justification. In quiet moments, Eleanor perceived his scrutiny not as doubt of her worth, but as fear of the consequences that worth might provoke. Within the Harcourt household, harmony fractured. Amelia's pride, long sustained by admiration, curdled into brittle civility. She congratulated her sister with words that rang hollow, her smiles precise and fleeting. Mr. Harcourt oscillated between relief and resentment, grateful for rescue, yet wounded by the loss of control. Mrs. Harcourt, torn between maternal affection and social calculation, urged Eleanor to be agreeable, cautious, and endlessly grateful. Eleanor absorbed these pressures silently, understanding that gratitude, when demanded, could become another form of confinement. As preparations advanced, rumors followed. Some whispered that the Duke's choice was born of eccentricity, others that Eleanor possessed some hidden influence, though none could name it. Invitations arrived bearing altered tones, and glances lingered where once they slid away. Eleanor bore this scrutiny with composed humility, refusing to trade dignity for approval. Yet in solitude, she questioned whether quiet strength could withstand a world eager to expose weakness. The Duke, meanwhile, found no peace in his London residence. Surrounded by symbols of lineage and obligation, he confronted the cost of his resolve. Advisors hinted at alliances forfeited, and acquaintances offered polite astonishment thinly veiled as censure. He answered with courtesy and withdrew with increasing frequency, discovering that authority did not shield one from doubt. In Eleanor, he had discerned sincerity, but sincerity alone could not guarantee happiness. His nights grew restless, haunted by the knowledge that he had altered two lives irrevocably. Their conversations, though infrequent, deepened in significance. On one afternoon walk through the estate gardens, the Duke spoke of responsibility not as privilege, but as burden, confessing that leadership demanded sacrifice uncelebrated by history. Eleanor listened, recognizing in his admission an unexpected vulnerability. She responded not with reassurance, but with understanding, offering the simple truth that endurance, when shared, became lighter. The exchange, modest though it was, shifted something unspoken between them. Yet restraint governed every gesture. Eleanor did not presume affection, and the Duke did not offer it. They existed within a narrow corridor of acceptable intimacy, where meaning resided in pauses and glances rather than declarations. Society applauded appearances while sharpening its judgment, waiting for any misstep to confirm its doubts. Eleanor sensed that her greatest trial lay not in becoming a duchess, but in preserving herself amid relentless expectation. The turning point arrived without ceremony. A letter, brief and formal, informed Eleanor that the Duke must delay their union indefinitely. Circumstances, he wrote, required reconsideration. No explanation followed. The words struck with a cruelty sharpened by politeness, reopening wounds she had scarcely acknowledged. She did not weep at once. Instead, she folded the letter carefully, as though order might restore meaning, and retreated from the room where hope had briefly lived. In the days that followed, Eleanor withdrew to the countryside under the guise of health, though all understood the truth. Her departure was quiet, unmarred by spectacle, yet its implications resounded. Society concluded what it pleased. Some blamed her inadequacy, others praised the Duke's prudence. Eleanor, removed from scrutiny, confronted grief unadorned by consolation. She read, walked, and reflected, allowing sorrow its voice without surrendering to bitterness. Time altered her. Distance stripped illusion from memory, revealing both the dignity of what had been offered and the fragility of what had been lost. Eleanor recognized that she had been valued, if briefly, for her essence rather than her adornment, and the knowledge fortified her. When the season turned and invitations beckoned once more, she resolved not to vanish again into invisibility. If she returned, it would be as herself, unhidden and unashamed. Thus, a year later, Eleanor prepared to re-enter London society, not as a hopeful bride, but as a woman tempered by disappointment. The world awaited her with familiar judgment, yet she carried within her a steadiness no rumor could erode. Unbeknownst to her, the Duke, bound by regret and clarity gained too late, would soon cross her path again, and the silence between them would demand reckoning. Her return was neither announced nor concealed, but it unsettled drawing rooms accustomed to simpler narratives. Eleanor arrived with measured grace, her demeanor altered by experience rather than artifice. She accepted invitations without eagerness, declined pity without offense, and spoke with a calm authority that surprised those who had dismissed her. The year had taught her that absence could refine character as surely as admiration once had, and she carried herself accordingly. News of her presence reached the Duke through indirect channels, each report sharpening his awareness of his own misjudgment. He had retreated into duty, convincing himself that sacrifice absolved him. Yet Eleanor's quiet persistence exposed the hollowness of such reasoning. He followed her progress with reluctant attention, noting the respect she commanded without seeking it. The realization unsettled him more than scandal ever could. Eleanor sensed his regard before she saw him. The weight of memory accompanied her through familiar halls, reminding her that composure did not erase longing. Still, she refused to rehearse imagined reconciliations. If they were to meet again, it would be without entreaty or reproach. She had survived neglect and rejection. She would not barter her dignity for sentiment. Thus, when the season's grand assemblies commenced, Eleanor prepared with neither hope nor dread, but resolve. She selected her attire with simplicity, valuing comfort over display, and rehearsed no words beyond courtesy. Whatever awaited her, she would meet it openly, trusting that strength born of hardship would guide her. The stage was set for their encounter, though neither yet grasped its consequence. Society, ever eager for drama, gathered in anticipation, unaware that the quiet woman it once ignored now possessed a gravity capable of unsettling even a duke. As Eleanor stepped once more into public view, she carried not expectation, but readiness, and the promise that what had been deferred would soon demand answer. In that readiness lay the true transformation, for Eleanor no longer awaited selection, approval, or rescue. She had learned that love, if it returned, must meet her standing firm, eyes lifted, voice steady, prepared to choose as deliberately as she once had been chosen. The future approached not as promise, but as reckoning, and she was resolved to face it without retreat, whatever cost or consequence awaited. The winter ball at Carlton House unfolded beneath a blaze of chandeliers, their light reflected in gilt mirrors and polished marble, transforming the vast rooms into a theater of rank and ambition. Music drifted through the air with measured elegance, each note reinforcing the unspoken hierarchies that governed movement and speech. Eleanor entered without announcement, her presence registered first as a hush, then as a ripple of recognition, for absence had altered her more profoundly than ornament ever could. She walked with composed assurance, her expression serene yet alert, as though every step were guided by intention rather than habit. The year of retreat had refined her manner, lending her a gravity that drew attention without demanding it. Those who once overlooked her now observed with cautious curiosity, uncertain how to reconcile memory with the woman before them. Eleanor acknowledged greetings politely, offering neither apology nor explanation, content to let her bearing speak where words might falter. Across the room, the Duke of Ashbury turned at the sound of her name, spoken softly, yet carrying unmistakable weight. When his eyes found her, the practiced attachment he wore so carefully deserted him. The familiar world of protocol and privilege receded, replaced by a singular awareness that stilled his breath. He saw not the woman he had relinquished, but one transformed by resilience, her composure reflecting a strength he had underestimated. For a moment, neither moved. The music continued, yet the space between them held a silence more commanding than sound. The Duke felt the full measure of his choice settle upon him, no longer abstract, but embodied in Eleanor's calm dignity. He understood then that duty, when stripped of compassion, became a hollow virtue, and that restraint, when misapplied, could wound beyond repair. Eleanor sensed his regard with equal clarity, yet she did not avert her gaze. She met it steadily, neither challenging nor inviting, asserting without declaration that she stood on equal ground. The knowledge fortified her, easing the last remnants of uncertainty. Whatever words might pass between them would no longer define her worth. She had claimed that for herself. When they were at last brought together by circumstance rather than design, courtesy governed their exchange. The Duke bowed, his greeting formal yet weighted with meaning. Eleanor responded in kind, her voice even, her manner unguarded. Those nearby sensed the tension and withdrew, granting them the privacy society pretended not to notice. They spoke first of trivialities, the weather, the season, the music, each phrase a careful step across uncertain ground. Yet beneath the surface, years of restraint pressed for release. The Duke observed her closely, noting the absence of bitterness in her tone, the quiet authority in her posture. It unsettled him more than reproach ever could have done. At length, he acknowledged what lay between them, not with apology, but with candor. He spoke of fear disguised as prudence, of counsel mistaken for wisdom, of a choice made in the belief that sacrifice was synonymous with honor. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of regret long borne in silence. Eleanor listened without interruption, granting him the respect of attention she had once been denied. When she replied, her words were measured yet unambiguous. She spoke of disappointment endured without spectacle, of solitude that had revealed her own capacity for endurance, and of the resolve she had gained in learning to stand without expectation. She did not accuse, nor did she absolve. Instead, she stated simply that affection, once dismissed, could not be reclaimed through remorse alone. The Duke received her words with humility, recognizing their truth. He did not plead, understanding that entreaty would diminish both of them. Instead, he offered what he had withheld before, an acknowledgement of her autonomy, and an admission that love, to be worthy, must be chosen freely, without coercion of rank or circumstance. His declaration was quiet, yet its sincerity resonated more deeply than any public vow. Eleanor considered him with thoughtful calm. She saw not the Duke alone, but the man shaped by expectation and capable, at last, of defying it. The decision before her was hers entirely, and the awareness steadied her heart. She realized that her longing had changed, refined by self-respect into something neither desperate nor fragile. Their understanding did not require immediate resolution. Instead, it settled between them as possibility, tempered by patience. When the Duke extended his hand, not as command, but as invitation, Eleanor accepted with deliberate grace. The gesture, witnessed by many, carried significance unmistakable in its restraint. Whispers resumed, yet their tone shifted, uncertain whether scandal or redemption was unfolding. They joined the dance, moving with synchronized composure, each step a testament to mutual regard rather than display. In a measured cadence of the music, Eleanor felt neither reclaimed nor surrendered, but recognized. The Duke, for his part, understood that love's true power lay not in possession, but in partnership freely entered. As the evening waned, society resumed its rituals, yet something irrevocable had occurred. Eleanor departed without haste, her demeanor unchanged, leaving behind speculation she no longer feared. The Duke watched her go, aware that the path ahead would demand courage equal to his title, and that only by honoring her independence could he hope to walk it beside her. In the days that followed, their correspondence resumed, altered in tone and intent. Words flowed with greater honesty, unburdened by pretense. They spoke not of obligation, but of shared values, of futures shaped by choice rather than expectation. Eleanor engaged without surrendering herself, and the Duke learned, through attentive regard, the balance he had once lacked. When at last their union was settled, it bore no trace of triumph. Instead, it reflected mutual respect earned through trial and reflection. Society adjusted, as it always did, recasting the narrative to suit its comfort. Yet within that adaptation lay progress, subtle and incomplete, but undeniable. Eleanor entered her new life not as the unseen sister, but as a woman whose worth had been recognized first by herself. The Duke stood beside her, not as savior, but as companion, his authority tempered by understanding. Together, they embodied a quiet defiance of convention, proving that dignity, once claimed, could not be revoked. Thus their story concluded not with spectacle, but with assurance. In choosing one another freely, they affirmed a truth seldom acknowledged in their world. That love, grounded in respect and courage, possessed a resilience no title alone could command.